Condoleezza Rices. One is a stateswoman, an academic's academic, an intellectual's intellectual, and an accomplished pianist. And the other Condoleezza Rice is a member of the new ownership group of the Denver Broncos. How do those two go together?
Same person, but only child. That's really the story. So the pianist, the music, her mother, 3 generations of musicians in my mother's line. And then football. A father who thought he was going to have a boy and who's looking for his All-American linebacker, got a girl instead, decided he was going to teach her about the sport, fell in love with the sport. And I have to tell you, it wasn't just we'd watch football on Sundays. It was that we would analyze football on Sundays. And so at about 5 or 6 years old, I can remember, Condoleezza, what is that? Daddy, that's a trap block. Condoleezza, what are they doing? Oh, they're setting up a screen, Daddy. And so the story is an only child. And if you're an only child, it's sports with your dad and music with your mother.
And your dad coached as well, didn't he?
My dad was
Your dad was a minister, of course.
My dad was a Presbyterian minister. He was a high school guidance counselor. And he actually, when he met my mother, he was the head of athletics for Fairfield Industrial High School, whose most famous student was Willie Mays. Willie Mays was a student of my mother's and my father's.
Really?
Yes, right. But yes, he was a football coach when I was born.
And you fell for the game because you enjoyed being with your dad? At some point, all right, understand. Here's a father, he's besotted with his only child, his adorable little daughter, who's 6 years old. Right. But at some point, you stopped being 6 years old, and you continued to love the game of football. How did that happen?
I never stopped loving the game of football. Well, in part, it was spending time with my father. I loved that, and it was very special. But I also just love the game. I love the strategy of the game. In fact, I invited the foreign minister of Great Britain to come to, are you ready for this? An SEC football game with me, Alabama versus Tennessee. So I just have to tell the story because it explains maybe the relationship between my interest in the study of war and football. So Jack Straw comes with me, and we were asked to toss the coin, do the coin toss. And we came through the tunnel, and 96,000 screaming fans. And Jack, who is a politician, is kind of going like this. I said, Jack, they would cheer a squirrel if it came through the tunnel right now. So just let's get out there and toss the coin and get it over with. And so he'd never been to a football game. And so I said, Jack, it is a game of taking territory and yielding territory. And that's the way you have to think about it. So in warfare, you're trying to take territory. It's the same thing in sports. And in football, and I explained to him that you take it 10 yards at a time. And every time you take 10 yards worth of territory, you get to keep taking territory until you finally score. And suddenly it made sense to him, because it was all about how you think about strategy.
That's how the British acquired an empire, roughly.
That's kind of how they acquired an empire. That's right. And it's also how empires are lost. Don't you start yielding territory. Empires. That's why one should never use a prevent defense.
All right. Football at the college level. A couple of years ago, you said this, I'm quoting you, "The collegiate model is worth defending. What's the value proposition for the student athlete? The best training, the best coaching, and a college degree," close quote. Okay, that's the value proposition for the student athlete. A good athlete can get a really good deal by going to college. What's the value proposition for the university?
Well, at its best, the value proposition for the university is that you have a student body that has broad interest and broad excellences. When I walk around the Stanford campus, I love the fact that there are students over in the math department who've already won the Westinghouse Prize in math when they're 15. There are kids in the music department who've already performed their first symphony by the time that they're 19. And there are young people on that playing field, or young golfers, or young tennis players who are at the top of their game and have become excellent at it. And so the broad excellences should be celebrated by a university. And if the student athlete is also a part of that community, not separate from it, and I do think there have been some mistakes made when we separate out athletes from the broader student body. Tiger Woods told me once that he used to love to walk across the Stanford campus and somebody would say, doesn't he play golf or something? Because he was just a student to so many of his colleagues. And so I think at its best, it works for the student athlete and it works for the university. At its worst, and you may know I chaired a commission on basketball for the NCAA, and I've not been a fan of one and done. And the reason I've not been a fan of one and done is that it's really 7 months and done. And then the value proposition is that the university gets to use those talents so that you can do well in March Madness. And what does the student athlete get out of it? Go to the NBA, maybe you succeed, maybe you don't. And so I do think that the value proposition has to be fully fulfilled by the university and not just have it be about winning the games and making the money. And I do want to just say one thing about the financing of college sports, because you hear a lot, well, there's so much money in football. But if you play, as Stanford does, 36 sports, the only sport that actually is revenue generating is football. So if you want to have Title IX sports, you have to generate the revenue from someplace. And so I think there's also a kind of misunderstanding of how the model works.
Okay, well, from that to this one then, name, likeness, and image.
Yeah.
Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh, in his concurring opinion in NCAA versus Alston of last year, get ready for this. Supreme Court Justice Kavanaugh, nowhere else in America can businesses get away with agreeing not to pay their workers a fair market rate on the theory that their product is defined by not paying their workers a fair market rate. It is not evident why college sports should be any different. The NCAA is not above the law, close quote. That decision came rolling down, and the NCAA changed its rules. And last year, we saw young Bryce Young at Alabama sign endorsement deals worth more than $1 million. So what happens to college sports?
Let me separate name, image, and likeness from the Kavanaugh opinion. Now, I actually introduced Brett Kavanaugh for his hearings. So I've known Brett Kavanaugh for years. He's a good friend. On this one, I fundamentally disagree. Name, image, and likeness.
The great thing is she's thought all this stuff through.
Name, image, and likeness is something that I believe is a good thing. I've never seen why a student in the music department can make a video that goes viral and then can benefit from that.
Right.
But a student athlete can't make a video or sell a jersey or make a commercial and make it. So in a sense, we were treating student athletes.
They were disadvantaged.
They were disadvantaged. And my first principle is the student athlete should be treated like every other student. So in this case, the student athlete was disadvantaged. In fact, when we did the basketball commission in 2017, we told the NCAA, the litigation was underway, we said we're not going to try to comment on this because the litigation is underway, but get prepared for name, image, and likeness because it's coming and it's the right thing. Now, at that point, there should have been some...
Hold on, I just want to repeat that. You told the NCAA to get ready for name, image, and likeness because it was the right thing before the Supreme Court ruled.
Before the Supreme Court decision.
That's very important.
In fact, it's there in my press conference when I delivered the report. I said, you know, and I hope students will be able to benefit from the name, image, and likeness. And at the time, there was a Notre Dame basketball player, a young woman, who had had the winning shots in both the semifinals and the finals. And she'd been invited to dance on Dancing with the Stars. And she said, can I keep the prize money? And they said, oh, yes, because that's dancing. That doesn't have anything to do with basketball. And I thought, yeah, right. They walked on the Notre Dame campus and said, she looks like she can dance. So the NCAA had been, to my mind, not consistent on this for a long time. Olympic athletes could monetize their medals. And so name, image, and likeness was kind of there. And I think it was a good thing that it finally... Now, the problem, though, is by putting no guardrails around it and saying, yes, you can go and get, represent a watch company, or some of our golfers represent Callaway or Titleist or whatever. That's fine. But what is going to destroy is the collectives that are being built, where you get boosters putting money together and saying anybody who comes to XYZ University will pay you X amount of money. That's pay for play. Now, the problem that I think Justice Kavanaugh has left is by talking about the athlete as an employee, what happened to the student part of that?
Right.
Yes, I have student employees in my office. I pay them, I think Stanford requires $15, $16 an hour, like every other student. Is that what you're talking about? Or are you saying what we're now going to do is we're going to turn it into the NFL, and we're going to have an open bidding process, and if you're a quarterback, you're going to make X, Y, or Z. That's the kind of quarterback scale. Now we've got the kind of offensive lineman scale. This really does destroy now the notion that these are student athletes and that there's a value proposition to getting that degree. When we did the basketball commission, 59% of D1 players thought they were going to the NBA. 59%. The number's 1.5%.
Wow.
So you'd better have a plan B. And if you're a college athlete, that plan B should be get your degree. And we in the university ought to be doing everything we can to get that student athlete to get that degree. If it means you come back after 3 years and pick up that last year, I'm all for the full cost of attendance. I'm all for a guaranteed 4 years. All of those, I think, are the responsibility of universities. But it's also the responsibility of the athlete to actually study and get that degree. And I think most universities do have, for athletes now, help in terms of tutoring and homework assistance and all of those kinds of things, because we ought to be making sure everybody's getting the degree.
Right. I want to return to earlier, this question of sports and academic life. You have just demonstrated, in your answer to the question a moment ago on name, image, likeness, that you really consider this stuff important.
Yeah, I do.
And I know you well enough, and we've been friends long enough that I know, Secretary of State, all these you're a teacher.
Yeah.
Really what you care about is what your mom and dad did and what you've devoted your life to, which is teaching.
That's right.
Kids. Okay. So the Ivy League is founded in 1954, and it makes explicit the decision to sacrifice playing quality for academic attainment.
Don't go there.
Ah.
No, don't, because ask the Ivy League about why it plays hockey so well.
Why does it play
Ask
hockey?
the Ivy League about some of its basketball. I wouldn't.
Well, okay,
consider
so
that's the purest
what
model.
I'm
Let me just
after
put it
here
that
is
way.
that
I'm not going to go any further, but I'm just going to say I don't think that the Ivy League can claim purity in its model.
would you have liked to have been the president of France or Russia sitting across from her? You really don't want to cross Condi Rice.
Yeah.
What I'm after here is okay, so let's take Stanford.
Yeah.
Every single year,
Yeah.
I find myself in conversations, I'm sure you find yourself in conversations, oh, if only Coach Shaw, if only Stanford would ease up a little bit on the academic requirements, we'd be certain to destroy Cal. Okay, so there's this notion.
We've done it.
Even so,
Anyway.
okay, well, so this is what I'm getting at.
Sorry, is there anybody out there from Cal? I'm sorry. Yeah.
She's not that sorry. This tension, the notion, Ivy League, Stanford, this tension between athletic attainment and being a good student. And if I understand you correctly, and I think I do, I'm pretty sure I do, you just don't buy it. You think that properly understood, these two should enhance each other. So explain that.
I think they
we
should.
all feel it in this
Right.
room, but it'd be nice to have you explain it.
They should enhance each other. And for the following reasons. First of all, it is, I think, the height of prejudice to assume that because somebody has athletic talent that they're not smart. This is, we talk about microaggression all the time. Whenever I hear just the association that if somebody's physically gifted, they must not be mentally gifted, I think, why would that be the case? And so the only reason that I think you sometimes have athletes having more difficulty in school, in high school, and then making it harder to get admitted to college, is sometimes a time management problem.
Right.
Right? So one of the things that I often say to student athletes when they come is, don't take your heaviest academic load in your heaviest athletic quarter. Right? That's just bad time management. But if you manage your time well, there's no reason that you can't do the work. And if you're at Alabama, or you're at Tennessee, or you're at Colorado, you can do the work if you're admitted. And it's incumbent on the university to only admit athletes who can do the work. And once you've admitted them, recognize their time management issues, recognize that they're going to be traveling a lot, and so the classroom experience won't be identical, and let's accommodate that in some way. But to just assume that you can't find athletes who can do college-level work. By the way, if an athlete out of high school can't do college-level work, there should be another alternative for them. I like the fact that in baseball, for instance, you can choose to go into the minors and go that route.
Right.
If you choose to go to college in baseball, though, you have to stay 3 years. And we know something, which is that if an athlete stays 3 years, they're likely to come back and finish. So this can be a very good system. And I'll say one more thing about it. When I hear about exploitation, there is some exploitation that goes on in college sports, no doubt about it. And I mentioned my problems with one and done. But I will tell you that if I think about the student athlete who's getting the best training, the best coaching, the best physical training, the best nutritional advice, and getting to apply their trade, and getting a free ride in college. And I think about the kid down the hall who's taking down loans and working 20 hours a week for that college degree. I think, this isn't a bad proposition.
It's not a bad deal.
If it's managed correctly. And I'd be the first to say that it hasn't always been managed correctly.
All right. Professional football. Back to you in your capacity as a soon-to-be owner of the Denver Broncos. This is rough. 2017 is the big bad year in professional football. This is when the study is published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. A study examined 111 NFL players and found brain injuries in 110. NBC commentator Bob Costas said in 2017, the existential question is the nature of football itself. This is hard to read, hard to quote. If I had an athletically gifted 12 or 13-year-old son, I would not let him play football. All right, that was 5 years ago. What progress have we made?
Well, I have friends who will not allow their kids to play football. And I think this is a choice that parents should make. But it is also the case that I believe the league has worked extremely hard over the last several years to improve the safety of the game, to use the very best technology to try to improve the safety of the game. If you think about the helmet and what the helmet looks like, and how one thinks about the helmet and how it might contact the human body, and changes in tackling rules. And by the way, I think that I'm sure it's hard to change the way that you tackle after being trained for all those years, but there are now going to be generations of kids who've come up tackling a different way. And so I think you can do everything you can to improve the safety of the game. And then people have to make a choice about whether they wish to play it. But I do think that the game can be made safer. I think that players are getting smarter about their own health. I have a former student who, after a few concussions, decided he was done. Mm-hmm. And so I think the combination of working on the technology, working on the techniques, giving choice to people, both parents and then later on to people who decide to play the sport, that it's never going to be a completely safe game. It is a violent game. But I think that we can make it a game that people will want to play, and if they want to play it, we ought to encourage it in the safest way possible. I'll say one other thing. I had 2 concussions. I was a figure skater. I hit my head a couple times on the ice. That's pretty violent too. We don't sometimes think about all the other ways that people are injured in sports. And so I hope other sports are doing as much as they can. Soccer is an example. Heading the ball apparently is not great for the brain. So this is not just about football. All sports, I think, are going to be challenged to try to be safer.
You may not be far enough into the Broncos thing yet, but...
I'm not.
You're not. All right. So I won't ask you about Broncos, but you mentioned...
I'm looking forward to seeing Russell Wilson, though, because I recruited Anna Wilson for the Stanford basketball team, his little sister, who played for Stanford.
Did you really?
I did.
So where does the innovation, you mentioned the technology, design of helmets, new techniques in tackling and so forth, is that the league's responsibility? Will your medical team at the Broncos, where does it take place?
Well,
everywhere. Huh?
Everybody has a medical team, and you will notice that when a game takes place and somebody is injured, the level of care that is taken to make sure that the person is taken care of and all the tests are taken and so forth and so on. But I think the league has, I know several academic neurologists and neuroscientists that the league has consulted, not because I know from the league, I know from friends of mine who are in the neurosciences. And so I think the league's taken it responsibly and needs to continue to take it responsibly.
2 quotations. Jeffrey Montez, a sociologist at the University of Colorado. Football has, quote, always tapped into this idea of what it means to be an American man. It's aggressive, it's tough, it's territorial. Second quotation is Condoleezza Rice. This is during an interview you gave in 2018. I hope the NFL will start to bring women into the coaching profession. One doesn't have to play the game to understand it. Close quote. Women in football. Explain yourself.
Well, I would consider myself kind of a woman in football. Look, there are all kinds of roles in football. There are ownership roles, there are general manager roles, there are president roles, there are roles in media and the like, so there are lots of different roles. But I even think in the coaching side, very interesting, when I was selected to be on the college football playoff committee, there were a number of commentators, shall I say, who said, well, she's never had her hand in the dirt. Turned out there were 3 other people on the committee who'd never had their hand in the dirt either, had actually never played the sport. And did we value in that committee the coaches and their views? Absolutely, because they brought a different perspective. But I had been provost of Stanford and overseen intercollegiate athletics at Stanford. So I brought that set of skills to the room. Oh, by the way, I also became known as the person who, when we were having discussions and what were we going to do and what team and so forth, who could bring some clarity to what it was we were trying to decide, because I'd been in the Situation Room where clarity really mattered for the country's security. So people can come from a lot of different perspectives and still do things well. And so I think women have a very important role to play in this sport. And oh, by the way, all that stuff about, territoriality and aggressiveness and toughness, it's just a male thing. You ever met Margaret Thatcher?
I did once.
Yes, I know you did.
Yes, she was rough.
And pretty territorial.
Exactly,
Yeah.
Exactly. Football, this beautiful game of football in this country. In 1960, as best I can tell, I have to admit I spent a little time on the internet yesterday. I may get the statistics a little bit wrong, but as best I can tell, in 1960, there was no team in the NFL that had black players that you couldn't count on the fingers of one hand. And it wasn't until 1962 that the Redskins signed their first black player. By 2019, this is the most recent year for which I could find the statistics, by 2019, 7 out of every 10 players in the NFL was a player of color. What has it meant to you to watch this change take place during your own lifetime? You who grew up in segregated Alabama.
Yeah, it's not just football. You could give those statistics on almost any institution in America. Because what it means is that our birth defect of slavery and its progeny, which was Jim Crow and discrimination, lasted for a very long time. It affected almost every aspect of American life. You could say that in some ways, basketball, baseball, football were earlier to do this. If you think about golf, which is a sport I love, have you heard the stories of Lee Elder or Lee Trevino or what they were trying to do? And that was well past 1960.
Right.
And so all that it says to me is that American institutions have changed, and they've changed for the better. They're more inclusive. They now really do care about talent first, which is really tremendous breakthrough. I would cite also the fact that it was a long time before black quarterbacks were somehow considered to have, the quarterback had to have it up here. And and still to this day, you'll sometimes hear about a black quarterback, well, he's just a great athlete. And then you'll hear about the white quarterback, well, he's really a student of the game.
Unbelievable. There's no such thing as a stupid
our
quarterback.
language still has a little bit of that coloration, but I'm very proud of the way that our country has come to do this. And by the way, I've said this many, many times. I've traveled all over the world. I don't think there's any country in the world that deals better with difference than the United States, but it took us a long time to get there.
You've traveled all over the world. There's a Canadian Football League, I'm told.
Yeah, they're actually pretty good.
They are pretty good?
Yeah,
All right.
they are,
all right.
yeah.
There have been
Different
various efforts
rules.
to get football going in Europe, but any way you look at it, attendance, revenues, television hours, the beautiful game of football is overwhelmingly an American game.
Yes.
Why? Well, wait, let me put it this way. You were Secretary of State. Why don't them foreigners get it?
Well, they're all asking why we don't get football is actually not what we play, right? So if you say football in Europe, of course, you mean what we call soccer. So we have a little bit of a translation problem. But I think that it is kind of an American game. It's impatient. It has a clock. It has, defined roles. It has a strategy. You have to actually kind of spend some time getting to know it. Try explaining to somebody who hasn't ever seen a football game, holding or first and second down or offsides or any of those things. And so I think it is a kind of cultural thing into which you're born a little bit as an American. Now, it's starting to be really popular when the game is held in London. That one's sold out, and even if it's the Jaguars, which it's very often been, No offense to Trevor Lawrence. He's a great young quarterback. But so I do think that in pockets it's starting to grow, but there's something about it, and it's urgency. There's nothing to me more American than a 2-minute drill. And maybe that, and I don't understand a sport.
I work for this lady. She does believe in drills.
Yeah. I don't understand a sport where you have extra time at the end, but you actually don't know how much time you have. So there's some things maybe I should try to learn about soccer as well.
Okay, a couple of last questions, and then I think there's going to be time for questions from the audience. This is the William Campbell Trophy Summit. You knew Bill.
I did.
What do these people need to know about Bill?
Need to know about Bill that Bill was the ultimate coach. Bill loved...
He was the coach the way you're a teacher.
He was the coach the way I was a teacher. He loved, he's a great entrepreneur, great business person, all of that. But I can't tell you how many, if you walked out there and talked to CEOs, how many of them Bill Campbell coached.
Right.
And because he loved passing on what he had learned to the next generation. And that's how I remember him. You know, so many days, even these days, we'll have a young CEO, you know, in a startup or something, and somebody will say, you know, you need to get him an executive coach like Bill Campbell.
Right.
And so he's remembered for being obviously very successful, loving the sports and also, but he's mostly remembered for what he passed on to other people.
This is my last question, and then we'll go to questions from the audience. Here's my last question. What should Broncos fans expect?
Hopefully we're going to win, all right? That's the piece that every NFL fan expects and every NFL team expects. And, you know, just to do it in a way that has integrity and really respects the great history of the game. I just love the fact that this is a game that people go to war on the field, and then afterwards there's a sense of camaraderie and brotherhood about it, you know, having been in the trenches together. I was the honorary captain for Stanford Rose Bowl in 15-1 that we destroyed Iowa. And by the way, I've been honorary captain 3 times and we've never lost, so tell David to get...
That's what Broncos fans should
yes,
expect.
Right, exactly. Right. But I had just a terrific experience. I talked about, I first of all told David said to Shaw, he said, when do you want to speak to the team? And I said at breakfast, because when I was an athlete, I didn't want anybody in my space just before I went out onto the field. So I spoke in the morning. But I said, there are 2 things I want you to do. I want you to trust in your preparation. But the great thing about team sports, which I didn't play and I missed that, is you also had to trust in the preparation of the person next to you. You couldn't try to do their job.
Right.
And that reminded me a lot of being in government and the way that you had to trust that others were going to do their job. The other thing is I said you have to finish. You have to finish every tackle, every play, every pass, every completion. You have to finish. And at the end of it, one of our safeties came up to me and he said, I'm so inspired, I want to go hit somebody. And I thought, that's not usually the reaction to my speeches, but I'm glad that it translated. So I just, I love the game for all of those reasons, but there is something that's kind of American about it.
I think, Mark, we have microphones, so put up your hand if you'd like to ask. Here's a question right here.
Yeah, another one over there, yes.
And let's line them up. Question, there's 1, 2. I think we have 2 microphones, so we'll get to 2 and stop there.
And there's 3 right here.
3 right here? Okay. So 1 is here, and 2 is the fellow in red, right back there. There we go. Go ahead, sir.
Hi, so my name's Quentin Goss. My question to you is, you've had a successful career. What's your daily routine?
Yeah. So my daily routine is to get up at 5 a.m. and I either work out in my home gym or twice a week I go to my trainer for strength training. On Fridays I go to Pilates, and on Saturdays and Sundays I walk and play golf. After I work out in the morning, I read the newspapers, and by the way, to get a fair reading these days of any issue, you have to read a lot of different views, and so I read a lot of different views. I do my email, I head to the office and I work. The truth of the matter is that I'm somebody who tries not to read email all day long. I read once in the morning, once around lunchtime, once around dinner time, and then I shut it off. I think that we can get into information overload. I try, and people will say, I sent you an email. Yeah, at 9 o'clock at night, all right? I'd gone to bed because I also go to bed early. So managing, I think the hardest thing about managing a day these days is managing all of the technology and not letting it overwhelm you. So that's why I try to do it in very specific time periods.
Spoken like someone who's still in training. By the way, I'm a little ticked off because that was the best question anybody's asked so far. Questioner number 2, would you also like to show me up?
Yeah, sure. Just as a black woman, in the midst of a lot of rooms that you would be considered a minority easily, I'm curious what your self-talk sounded like to kind of stay at peace, or if you even felt ever uneasy, just kind of what that self-talk looked like to be as successful as you've been, or as you've been kind of throughout your whole life.
Yeah, thanks. I'm going to say something that may sound a bit paradoxical. I'm glad I grew up in segregated Birmingham. Because in segregated Birmingham, our parents in this community that I grew up in, and by the way, a lot of really successful people in that community, kids in that community, they told us two really important things. First of all, you have to be twice as good. Right? Now, they didn't say, isn't it a pity that you have to be twice as good? They said, just be twice as good. So I tell all of my students now, I don't care what color you are, what gender, I say, try to be twice as good. You're going to be twice as confident. You're going to work twice as hard. And when you walk in that room, you're not going to let anybody take it from you. The second thing they said is there are no victims. The minute you consider yourself a victim, you have passed you're putting your future in somebody else's hands. So you may not be able to control your circumstances, but you can control your response to your circumstances. And it was a kind of armor that they gave us, that when I would find myself as the only in whatever room, I think that armor was kind of immediate. And I would think, you know, you're not, and then my father told me one final thing. We'd already moved to Denver, and somebody didn't want to sit next to me because I was black. I'd gone from a segregated school to St. Mary's Academy, which only had 3 black women in my class. Right? My father said, they didn't want to sit next to you? I said, no. He said, that's just fine, as long as they move. Right? So it was saying, their racism is not your problem. It's their problem. And so I think that kind of armor has always been with me. And then the only other thing I'll say is that when you're the only in a room, we have a thing now about, you know, making people who are different comfortable. It's actually kind of empowering if you take it to make them comfortable. Don't wait for them to kind of patronize you and say, oh, I have to, because you didn't land from Mars. You went to a lot of the same schools. You have a lot of the same interests. Try to be proactive about making the environment good for everybody. So I'll tell you a funny little story about this. I worked for the Joint Chiefs of Staff for a year when I was a young faculty member. I worked for Strategic Nuclear Planning. These were the guys who wrote the Integrated Operations Plan for the Employment of Nuclear Weapons. I was 3 things they had never seen in that small office. I was black, female, and civilian. And so the first day, they said, the rookie makes the coffee. Okay, fine. So I made the coffee. I made coffee so strong nobody can drink it, all right? Wasn't asked to do that again. But I could have said, hey, I'm a professor at Stanford. I don't make coffee. Just make the coffee. Then I won the football pool the next week. And now we had something in common. So every Monday morning it was who won the football pool and how did the Colts play or how. So if you're different in the room, be confident enough in yourself to say, I have a role also in making this relationship work.
I think question number 3 is right down here. Is that right?
Yeah. You're the ringmaster. Yeah.
And I feel as though we've neglected this side. Is there anybody over here?
Right.
Oh, okay, right there. That's fine. Good.
Good morning, Dr. Rice. Ron Riley, University of Kentucky.
Okay.
Question, how do we adjust for inadequate education up through high school? And by inadequate education, it's like all schools aren't created equal, right?
Yes.
In terms of
Yes.
resources.
Right.
When we start thinking about admission requirements
Yeah.
or trying to make the leap from
Yes.
high school to college.
Yes,
Thanks.
it's such an important question because, you know, I used to say, and I still say, if I can look at your zip code and tell whether you're going to get a good education, we're doing something wrong. And right now, I can say that. And I think this is a place where sports can play an important role. So let's go to the 8-year-old who's playing Pop Warner and sees himself as, you know, playing one day in the NFL. Capturing that kid then and saying, you know, if you don't study, you are going to cut off your options when colleges start looking, you're not going to have the grades and the test scores to do it. So start planning not just about how good you're going to get at playing football or playing basketball or playing a sport. Start thinking about how you're going to put together that academic and athletic package. I think that boys and girls clubs, I'm very active with boys and girls clubs, and they're doing more of this now, more of the educational function. Because unless you catch that kid early, really, if you don't read by the time you're third grade, you're not going to read. And so I think we should all take it as a responsibility to say, we're not going to wait until we realize in grade 11 they don't have the grades or the test scores to go anywhere to college, and so they're out of the game. And their options aren't so good. So I really think we can use sports in a very important way. I did a Boys and Girls Club with Larry Fitzgerald. And this young kid asked him, what do I do to become an NFL player? And Larry Fitzgerald said, you need to do what I should have done more, study. Right? So I think those messages can get out there early.
I've got a question here, and then maybe you get the last question. Yes. How's that? If we can get a microphone off in this direction. Go ahead.
Hello, Dr. Rice. Thank you for being here. I'm Terrence Turner. I went to Marist College, and I work at Regeneron Pharmaceuticals now. Your black quarterback stigma example kind of struck a chord with me because I think a lot of black professionals these days kind of still face some of those stigmas. And I know in my career as a black scientist, I've kind of faced that sometimes where I walk into a room and people ask me if I'm there to fix the projector or if I'm there to set up their lunch and stuff. Yeah. So what would you say to like hiring managers or talent developers at different corporations on how they look at different employees and recognize some of these things? Thank you.
Thank you. You're so right. And I say to hiring managers, and then it's not just the hiring, it's the socialization of the. You have just got to start getting the place that when somebody walks in who looks different, you don't think you know their capabilities, you don't think you know what they do, you don't think you know how they think. Right? In some ways, the height of racism is to prejudge somebody because of the color of their skin. And women face it too, you know. I was a specialist in Soviet military affairs. When I was a young person, I'd walk into a room and they looked at me like, are you in the right meeting? Maybe your meeting's down the hall. But you have to have the fortitude internally to say, the minute I open my mouth and start to talk, you're gonna realize I didn't come to fix the projector, right? So let's give me a chance to do that. And then others have to get to the place that they are more accepting of the fact that just because you look a particular way. You know, I went to college, I was gonna be a great concert pianist, all right? Race didn't have anything to do with the fact that I had to find another career, because I just wasn't good enough. But I found what I was really good at doing. Now, the fact that a black girl from Birmingham, Alabama would end up as a Soviet specialist might have struck some people as sort of strange, but from my point of view, that was my passion. That's what I wanted to do. And so I say to my students all the time now, don't let anybody choose what you're passionate about or what you're going to do. That's your passion. Just because you look one way or another doesn't have anything to do with it.
Last question, no pressure, just make it the best one.
First of all, thank you, Dr. Rice. I feel like I speak for everyone. We've had a great time listening to you. My question is, honestly, you've been kind of leading to it with all of your great answers. But you mentioned clarity, and that's kind of what you brought to the college football playoff when you became a part of the team. I think you get a lot of clarity from self-awareness. So I just want to give you an opportunity to speak on like when you either figured out the self-awareness or when you started to apply that, and if you felt like that was the key to your success and the things you accomplished.
Well, thank you very much, because it allows me to say something I think is really important. I don't think you're ever done trying to get better. And I don't care what you've achieved, I don't care what, you ought to always be asking yourself, how can I get better? And so one of the things that fairly early in my career, I realized, and I would say to everybody, try to figure out if there's something that's holding you back. And by the way, try not to make it that somebody else is holding you back, all right? Ask yourself honestly, how am I holding myself back? Now, mine was, I am a terrible procrastinator. Terrible. And I got rewarded for it because when I was, in college, I could read the book the night before and get an A on the test, and so it was, but it's no way to live, and you suddenly realize you're putting yourself under all kinds of pressure. I also realized that there are two things that don't work that way. Learning a language doesn't work that way, and learning a musical instrument doesn't work that way. So 1 hour for 8 days will give you better results than 8 hours in 1 day. So I had to fix this problem. And so I said to myself, so why do I procrastinate? Well, because I keep thinking, oh, I have plenty of time to do that. So now I am a scheduler. I schedule everything. You just heard me go through the gentleman's question. At 5 o'clock I get up. At 5:30 I go to the gym. At 7 o'clock I come in and I read this. At 8 o'clock I do that. And it drives people crazy when they vacation with me, because I even schedule on vacation. We'll get up at 6, we'll do this, we'll do that. But it's a way for me to tame that instinct of pushing it off and pushing it off and pushing it off. And my chief of staff, Stephanie's over there, she will tell you that I am constantly asking about my schedule. What am I doing at 9? What am I supposed to be doing at 10:30? Do I have 15 minutes before I get there? It's also made me able to use 15 minutes better than anybody in the world. If I know that I'm practicing a piece to play a concert and I've got this few passages that's really hard, I can use 15 minutes and fix that passage. And I don't waste time as a result. So that may be your problem, it may be some other problem, but I hear people say all the time, I want to be my authentic self. Well, sometimes your authentic self can use some help, right? And so if you're really honest about what's holding you back, you can try to fix it, and you have to keep trying, because I'll tell you, the procrastination thing still crops up once in a while. So you have to keep working at it.
Gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, there are ladies here as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter, Dr. Rice.